Without a doubt, the phrase from which the show gets its title is intended to apply to its central protagonist, Dev Shah. Throughout the entirety of Master of None, Aziz Ansari's character struggles with pursuing his acting career, an apprenticeship in a pasta shop, and maintaining several relationships, both romantic and platonic. Dev acts as a surrogate for every person watching, showing that each and every one of us are a jack of all trades, stumbling through our pursuits, personal and professional, never truly mastering any of them. That being said, I believe there's another interpretation to Master of None's title. The jack of all trades isn't just Dev Shah, but also the show itself. With stunning cinematography, nuanced social commentary, and thoroughly developed romances, Master of None never focuses all of its resources into one aspect of a great TV show. It instead opts to have entire episodes without the protagonist, or shot in black and white. Sometimes it'll have a thorough dialogue breaking down every nuance of a social issue, and at other times, no words will be spoken at all, instead letting the viewer absorb the imagery on the screen undisturbed. So that's what this video will be focusing on. All of the different ways Master of None forms a narrative for an episode, and why this variation is so effective.
Say whatever you want. This movie's not really about words.
When I first sat down to watch Master of None, knowing not much more than it's Aziz Ansari's show, I expected anything from a pretty unadventurous plot-driven comedy to a fairly light and breezy sitcom. However, as soon as I hit play, I was presented a sign of the show's creative ambition, the aspect ratio. Love it or hate it, the 235:1 anamorphic aspect ratio is an example of a creative choice that most other shows won't even know they can make. To test several aspect ratios and land on one conventionally reserved for cinema demonstrates that every element of the show is up for discussion, a luxury perhaps in part afforded by producing for Netflix and not a traditional television network. Whilst at first it might feel off seeing black bars around a 30-minute episode comedy series, it didn't take long for me to adjust, and I can really appreciate some of the atmospheric shots that the aspect ratio allowed. Master of None also makes unique artistic decisions on an episode-by-episode basis. For example, deciding to have the Season 2 opening episode be shot in black and white, with modernist stunning architecture and a significant portion of the dialogue spoken in Italian, you can't help but feel you're watching a piece of European cinema history, and not something made for Netflix in 2017. Another great example of the show's creative ingenuity is the final scene of Season 2, Episode 5, The Dinner Party. Closing an episode by having Dev in the backseat of an Uber in a medium shot, with 2/3 of the screen empty and no dialogue, just soft cells say hello, wave goodbye, playing for 3 whole minutes before fading to black for the end credits, is such an amazing way to convey the complexity of emotions Dev is facing at the time.
Thanks.
In fact, I think I'd say that this moment, right as the credits roll, is the peak of the entire show for me, as the episode immediately after is New York, I Love You. This episode gives nearly zero screen time to any character we've seen previously, instead choosing to show the everyday lives of minorities living in the titular city, and is probably my favourite episode of the whole series. Focusing on the experiences of a black doorman, a deaf woman, and immigrant taxi drivers, the episode perfectly demonstrates the show's capability for both artistic creativity and social commentary. It leaves the viewer in total silence for nearly 10 minutes while still conveying the troubles a deaf person may face on a daily basis, and it instills a respect for the efforts of the cab driver through a montage of his work accompanied by French music, without ever needing to even give the character a name. The discussion of social issues goes far beyond the confines of New York, I Love You, with many episodes dedicated to discussing a single sexual or racial prejudice. And I use the word discuss very literally here, as more often than not, extensive, direct dialogue is used to explore the nuances of a problem. At face value, primarily using dialogue to provide social commentary may seem at best unimaginative, and at worst, overly preachy. I felt, however, that Master of None's implementation of it was well executed. There are several benefits to using dialogue to this end, with the most significant being that it removes the possibility for the show's moral conclusion to become confused. With characters very literally explaining the show's view on an issue, even if it doesn't reach a concrete conclusion, the room for interpretation on the viewer's end is minimized. Furthermore, it parallels how we expand our own understanding of complicated issues we encounter daily. Whilst in fiction, a character may often broaden their understanding through some sort of great revelation, in real life, the most effective way to do so is through empathetic discussion with the people it affects. Some of the show's funniest moments also act as a setup for deeper moral discussion. Through doing this, Master of None doesn't always have as bleak an outlook as it could do, as it is supposed to be a comedy after all. I'd say overall the show does a good job of finding the sweet spot, often joking when discussing social issues, but never in a way that trivializes them. One of my favourite examples of the show presenting someone dealing with a social prejudice is Season 2's episode Thanksgiving. The episode forms its narrative around Denise and Dev's shared Thanksgivings, ranging from when they were children to 2017, and uses this structure to show Denise's experience of coming out as gay as a black woman, by having a whole episode dedicated to discussing this theme, with no relevant plot development outside the confines of itself. Thanksgiving can provide hilarious moments, thoughtful discussion, and meaningful character development all in one.
You know my hearing is bad. Where did she go?
China.
China! She went to China, Grandma. She lived in Shanghai for 2 months for work, and a lot of people thought she was Beyonce. And this one restaurant even put her photo on the wall, but she didn't have the heart to tell them.
There is something that bothers me a bit though, when it comes to how the show presents morality. Sometimes it's too lenient in its judgment of Dev. Thankfully, I can't think of too many examples when this is the case, but the most egregious one for me is in the episode The Other Man, in which Dev has an affair with a married woman. Whilst this episode is home to one of the funniest moments in the whole show...
Wait a minute, I know you. Wait, how do I know you?
You cut in line in front of me at the ice cream store. You remember that?
What? So you fucked my wife?
That was the last King Kong banana split. You didn't mean it. You threw it in the trash.
How the fuck?
Something doesn't quite sit right for me with the episode's everybody is a winner conclusion. Maybe the goal here was to present affairs as a complicated issue, and that affairs equals bad is an oversimplification of the whole idea. But if that is the case, then the show itself provides a contradiction, as when this wealthy white guy in New York I Love You is doing the same thing, he's presented as the sleaziest guy ever. I feel like maybe the show became conscious that its message regarding affairs outside of monogamous relationships was far from as clear as the rest of them, since it was significantly more detailed when exploring the topic in Season 2's romantic plotline. But before I go into that, it makes sense to discuss Season 1's equivalent, the story between Dev and Rachel. I loved the episode in Nashville. It was a fun way to quickly get the viewer invested in their relationship, which of course makes the ensuing growing apart feel much more impactful. Whilst I obviously didn't enjoy seeing it happen, it was interesting to watch a TV relationship fall apart without any real catalyst. There was no affair, no dramatic argument that there so often needs to be in fiction, just a much more real descent into monotony and the looming threat of being locked into that indefinitely. As for Dev's situation with Francesca throughout the latter half of Season 2, what I found most interesting about the presentation of the whole affair was that as the viewer, we are given insight into two perspectives. We mostly see the perspective of Dev, who is completely tunnel-visioned on the prospect of being with Francesca, seeing Pino mostly as an obstacle to his ambitions, with disregard to how his actions could affect him. I see this as pretty callous of Dev, considering Pino was one of his few friends during his stay in Modena, but I think Francesca's perspective is a better fit with the typical viewer's feelings. We see Francesca struggle with her lack of excitement in her soon-to-be marriage, in a manner that is similar to Dev's predicament at the end of his relationship with Rachel. The key difference between the two, which we're aware of due to seeing scenes that don't feature Dev, is that she's concerned about how her actions could hurt Pino in a way that Dev is not.
Questa cosa, scusami.
Non lo so, non lo so.
Ma noi dobbiamo andare a Modena, ci dobbiamo sposare, c'è il negozio, le cose, ma che stai dicendo, scusami, eh? Oh!
Pino, non lo so. Non lo so, io non...
Ma che cazzo vuol dire non lo so, scusami, ma ti rendi conto?
Non so più cosa voglio.
It's worth mentioning that while showing these romance arcs with less of a dramatic filter than most shows would implement, Master of None doesn't compromise the amazing cinematography that it hits in all the other episodes. In particular, there's some absolutely stunning shots in the last 2 episodes of Season 2, one of which has double the runtime of the rest of the episodes to fully explore the aforementioned ideas. Master of None brings with it a wealth of fresh creativity and thoughtful narrative, discussing important issues in artistically original ways. It frequently exceeds the boundaries of its genre, yet rarely forgets to be funny. It brings a flexibility to each episode, never setting rules for itself, and it's through this flexibility that Master of None finds not only its niche, but its excellence.